We are live here on Sovereign Artsakh. Actually, hello everyone. We're on multiple YouTube channels right now. If you're watching on Christian Podcast Central or This Way Network, I encourage you to join us on Sovereign Artsakh, because if you watch on Sovereign Artsakh YouTube channel, that's where the majority of the people in the comment section will be joining us. If you want to be a part of the chat, the live chat, and see what people are saying about Daniel and I, or what we have to say today, join us there. Also, click the like button and share this video. That's the way it works on YouTube. This will be saved later, but we're doing this live, and this is Daniel's first time, so ease him into it. Ease him into his first live stream. Pre-recording. Yeah, go easy on him. Pre-recording is always that kind of that safety net. If I make a mistake, we can go back and edit it out well. Be on your best behavior, Daniel. Don't say anything that's going to offend. Just kidding. I know you well enough already that you're not going to say anything that's going to either bother our audience or bother the YouTube overlords. So how you doing, Daniel? Good to see you, my friend.
I'm doing well. Nice to see you too.
We've been going a little bit back and forth on this topic, and I'm grateful now, everybody. Daniel's taking ownership of the show. He's like, I've got a topic let's talk about. And so I'm going to turn it over to you just to kind of introduce this topic, because we live in an era of this word identity has, it's kind of in the foreground, identity politics and certain tribalism, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a legitimate thing. Like, what does it mean? What does identity mean? How do we identify ourselves? What is Armenian identity versus Armenian-ness? I listened to some of the links that you've sent me about this subject. So Daniel, I want to hand it off to you. What is the Armenian identity?
Well, you kind of set it up perfectly already in terms of what we're going to talk about today. The Armenian identity is something that I think is really relevant today, given just the state of things around the world, the state of the situation in Armenia itself. And what is an Armenian? What does it mean to be an Armenian? Is it just Yan in your name, or is it something deeper than that? Is it someone who was born in Armenia itself, or is ethnically Armenian? What does it mean to be Armenian? What is the Armenian identity about? So I think it's a very pertinent topic for this morning.
Good. I have a clip that I'm going to play in a minute. But actually, why don't you tell me who this, you sent me this clip. Tell me the background. Tell me your thought process. And I said, come up with some content. Give us a link that lends, supports the argument of Armenian identity from the point of view that we want to discuss. Who is this? Why is this the go-to clip? I appreciate it and I enjoy it. I listen to a lot of it. I'm going to finish listening to it, but we're going to give an excerpt. Who is this and what are we about to hear?
Well, actually, I've lost the clip. Why don't you play it and we can discuss it after. I'm trying to locate it here and I can't after I sent it to you yesterday.
Well, the name of the guy is let's see. Let me pull it up. All right, I've got the clip here. Where's it? There it is. I'm going to show it.
The debate for Armenian identity, and I put Armenian identity in inverted commas, has a long history and is an ever-evolving discourse, especially in the diaspora. At least in the last 100 years or so, there have been hierarchies of identity and canonical approaches to definition of Armenian, especially as articulated, rationalized, and promoted by the elites, institutions, political parties in the diaspora and in Armenia. On one hand, there are a host of assumptions on identity and politically correct definitions, expectations and interpretations of who is an Armenian. On the other, self-defined and actualized Armenian identities are prevalent among post-genocide third and fourth generation Armenians spread around the world. These include, for example, not only hyphenated Armenians, such as Armenian Americans or Lebanese Armenian, Russian Armenian, but also percentile Armenians, half, quarter, 1/8, and so on. And recently, the more openly discussed category of Islamized Armenian identity. In short, identity is not a fixed notion. It is a dynamically evolving concept depending on the social, political, and cultural environment, among other aspects, of course, in which Armenians find themselves.
That's a great setup for the conversation today. The person who is speaking is Hratch Chilingirian. He is a faculty member at Oxford, and he is an associate professor there dealing with Asian and Middle Eastern studies. And he was speaking at an event with the Hrant Dink Foundation, who is an Armenian journalist in Turkey who was assassinated some years ago. So there's lots of nuances that we can have to this conversation, but I think he sets it up great, and let's go at it. Let's talk about it.
Before we go at it, when you sent that clip to me, all right, let me just. This has been happening to me, and I say this over and over again. You know, God, there's evidence in my life and evidence in the progression of what I'm doing that God's in control. God is guiding. So we're back and forth talking about what are we going to talk about? Let's get a clip to talk about. And then you pick that one and you send it, and I see Hratch Chilingirian. I'm like, okay. And I listen. I'm like, okay, this guy's an academic. Good. I like the way he's talking. He's an academic. He's credible and Armenian. And so last night I had a dinner. We're not going to disclose the name just yet of who I had dinner with. But last night I had a dinner with a very the most preeminent Turkish historian on the planet, like a guy who he himself is history. Like he's not just an iconic historian, but he himself is history.
Wow. And
I mentioned, oh, do you know this guy? Have you heard of Hratch Chilingirian? He goes, he's one of my closest friends. So he goes, yes, he's an Oxford, and he's and speaking of Hrant Dink, he's like, oh, Hrant Dink's daughter just called me, like while we're talking, while I'm at dinner. Hrant Dink's daughter, you know, was like, oh, we're going to hang out tomorrow, blah blah blah. So the things that you're talking about, I find myself in these circles all of a sudden, and I'm so grateful. So it's
that's
nice.
Yes,
you know, it's like, okay, Lord, yes, Lord. I'm being carried along and guided by the friends and the people that you're putting in my life. So he's talking about identity, and he mentions it. It's something that's in flux. Or which direction do we want to go with to lead off on this conversation?
Well, I think it's something that in my relationship to Armenia over 20 plus years now, I've heard it discussed in different forms from different angles at various times. You know, people saying who is Armenian, who is not Armenian. If you're born in Armenia, you're Armenian. If you're descendant of Armenians, you're Armenian. If you speak Eastern Armenian, you're more Armenian than Western Armenian, or vice versa. Things like that. You know, are you more Armenian because you were born in Armenia versus born in the diaspora, and maybe you don't speak the Armenian language? So all of these things are kind of swirling right now. And I think we can touch on a few of those, you know, like Western versus Eastern. Are you more Armenian because you were born in Armenia versus not? I mean, let's discuss this.
Explain for our uninformed audience what you mean by Western versus Eastern Armenian, because they're different dialects. There's the YAN versus the IAN, but what does that mean? Western versus Eastern. Those in California are Western Armenians, and those are in New York are Eastern Armenians. Tell me.
As I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong to those who are watching us. Eastern Armenians would be those who are born in Armenia itself, in the Republic of Armenia. Western Armenians tend to be born in the diaspora or outside of Armenia, could be in other countries. could be nearby, like Lebanon, could be as far away as France or Argentina or the U.S. Or Canada. And there's a difference even in the spelling of Armenian names from Western to Eastern, which is something that really developed over the last 20 years or so. You would tend to see now those who are born in Armenia itself have YAN at the end of their name if you write it with English characters, and those who are born in the diaspora tend to spell their name with IAN at the end. So that's kind of a distinction between the two. And there's also two dialects of the Armenian language, Eastern Armenian and Western Armenian. There are some differences in pronunciation. You know, one group from the other can generally understand each other, but I mean, it's like British English versus American English. You know, there are some nuances and some unique terms and things of that sort.
There's obviously the majority overlap, but there's accents and turns of a phrase or even words themselves. They're used differently, Eastern and Western. Question, maybe you don't know. Actually, something you just said, you just taught me. Even after 7 years in immersing myself in Armenian, I didn't realize that the YAN was the Hayastansi spelling, essentially, right? The IAN is everywhere else, pretty basically.
Generally speaking.
Right, generally. And that makes sense now. I'm thinking, oh yeah, my historian, even though he's a California guy, he was born in Yerevan, right? So his last name, he was born and raised for the first few years there. Another question, maybe you don't know, but one of the phrases used is Eastern Turkey is Western Armenia. So the current nation of Turkey, at least half of it, the eastern half of it, is actual Armenia, historic Armenia.
Right.
Is that, when referred to Western Armenia, is that a different meaning for Western Armenian? Is there the dialect from that region, or is it more the diaspora? You understand what I'm saying when we say Eastern versus Western? But they do say Western Armenia is Eastern Turkey is Western Armenia. Is that a different use of the phrase Western Armenian?
That's a good question, and I would probably throw that to our audience. Maybe they'd like to weigh in on that. That's a great thing to respond to us on.
And if they don't, we'll figure it out next week. We'll get an answer to that.
Right. You know, and Western Armenia, as we call it, which is located in Turkey at the moment, you know, that was a region where, you know, part of the genocide took place. So many of the Armenians who were there at the time were either killed, or the survivors, they fled for their lives, literally, or they and their families, to other parts of the world, which is, you know, when people talk about the diaspora, that's why we have the diaspora. And there are some who are saying that, you know, Armenians from the diaspora are less Armenian, but I mean, let's face it, the reason that the diaspora exists at all is because of the Armenian genocide, and that is to blame.
Now, as I listened further into Harach's, I guess it's a presentation, and he's something about identity, some of the distinctions. Identity is something that's not chosen, right? You know, the Armenian identity itself is, if you're genetically, you know, you're born into an Armenian family, you don't choose your identity, but you can choose essentially the level of Armenianness that you exhibit or that you live out in your life. You know what I mean? You know.
But I guess I would maybe challenge that notion a little bit. I mean, do we choose our own identity? I mean, yes, you have an ethnicity, you know, where genetically speaking, you and your ancestors come from a certain region. But for example, I'm not born Armenian, but I identify, I call myself Armenian in my heart. I'm not Armenian by birth, I'm Armenian by choice. So I have taken on a great love for Armenia and devotion to Armenia, and I devoted, 20 plus years to helping Armenia and supporting Armenian causes. So in that sense, I would argue that I've adopted an Armenian identity, even though I'm not Armenian by ethnicity. So that's also a great point for people to comment on as well.
Right, and depending on the context, if you're standing in line filling out documents for, I don't know, important government documents, and it says ethnicity, you're not going to fill in the blank Armenian necessarily.
Right, because they're asking for your ethnicity, right, as opposed to identity.
So, what are the characteristics of Armenian identity that might not be ethnic?
Good question. Devotion to Armenia, Armenian causes, Armenian history, Armenian values, Armenian nationalism. How fervently do you support the Armenian people and the nation of Armenia, or Armenians in the diaspora, or promoting Armenian culture and language? That's something that's very important, because in order to keep a nation of people alive, whether they have their own recognized nation or as an ethnic group of people, there are things that are needed to sustain that. Armenian Christianity, preserving that has gone a long way to preserving the Armenian identity throughout the centuries. The Armenian language is something that is pivotal, crucial in keeping the Armenian identity as well. Armenian cuisine, Armenian music, art, literature, dance, all of these things are aspects of what it means to be Armenian.
I'm going to bring up a comment here from Lucas. I identify as a Christian conservative. I'm Canadian by birth, but identify as an American. Can I do that? Lucas is a longtime friend of the network and the channel here. And Lucas, yes, we will accept you as American. Again, I don't know if when you're crossing the border if that'll work, but we're happy to have you, Lucas. When I discovered Armenia, it's funny to say that when I discovered Armenia pre-exists me by thousands of years, but
you discovered it in your own life, in your own experience. So I think that's valid.
Yeah. So my discovery of this incredible culture that's everywhere present, right? That's the crazy thing, is like, here I am living where I live and, going through the motions, going through my life. And I come across this incredible reality that's ancient and far away, but I happen to live next to Glendale, so it's not that far away, right? So Armenia West is right next door to me. And then as I become immersed and recognize Armenia has been here the whole time. Armenian influences. There was Duke Magian was the governor of California decades ago. I'm like, oh, okay, there's a name that I know. And then just in my research, the inventions and the contributions that Armenians have made to the advancement of human progress. It's incredible. And I recognize they're like an outlier, right? Armenians on average are more driven, higher achievers in general than most other ethnic groups. And I think that's because of the suffering and because of they've been pushed in that direction, right? When you put pressure on something, it's true, the true nature of it's going to come out, and they have become better humans, or more suited, or have provided for humanity in more ways than anybody else in general. But when I discovered it as the first Christian nation, here's I guess where this ties into Armenian identity. 1800 years ago, Armenians were not Christian. 1700 years ago, they were, right? So there was an Armenian identity pre-Christianity, which Zoroastrian, I've heard that was the predominant religion. I've heard people say no, it was something else, but at the time of the conversion, maybe it was predominantly Zoroastrian. And then there's this overwhelming transformation of the Armenian culture, kind of on, I wouldn't say on a dime, because there was the influence within the culture that led the king to declaring, right, that declaring we're going to be Christians, but it solidified or brought into existence something that had never existed before, and that's the nationalistic notion, or a corporate acceptance and agreement to Christian principles. Right? There'd never been a nation, a corporate people, to en masse adopt these principles as the governing principles. And to me, it's become inseparable from Armenianness. You know, it's something that can be in flux. But I think when Armenia converted to Christianity, the culture it already had was enhanced, and even further because of their commitment to biblical principles, and they began to thrive more so than the surrounding nations, which is kind of a double-edged sword, right? If you're, say, really succeeding and doing well, but the dominant culture around you, like the Ottoman Empire, the Muslims, are not necessarily driven in the same way, it can cause enmity and jealousy, which, I mean, we're not talking about the Armenian genocide in particular, but is there a problem with being Armenian, inherent to being Armenian?
A problem? In what sense do you mean a problem?
Is it wrong to be better than everybody else?
Well, you know, I guess I'm biased because I've become so devoted to the Armenian people and the Armenian nation, and I think it's miraculous and incredible that in spite of all that Armenians have endured for hundreds and thousands of years, they have endured, and they exist and they prosper as a people. And really, I think that the two things that have preserved the Armenian identity is its Christianity and its language. And of course, its language is also connected to its Christian faith, because Mashtots was an Armenian priest, and he designed the Armenian alphabet so that people could read their Bible. So even their language is tied to their Christian history. But throughout persecution that they've endured for so many centuries, they have existed. And what you were saying about the pressure that Armenians were under, I had this image in my mind of how coal is turned into diamonds with the pressure for however long it takes. I'm not a scientist, but right. I kind of see the Armenia is like this diamond that has been put under pressure for so long that it's become this incredibly valuable treasure. And one thing that is always remarkable to me is every time I've gone to Armenia, and it's been 24 times already I've been there over the last 20 years, for such a small nation, they have an incredible wealth of musicians, artists, dancers, painters, authors. It's really as a musician, I would say some of the finest musicians that I've ever met are in Armenia. And this tiny country about the size of Rhode Island has this incredible wealth of talent and richness of culture that has been refined like a diamond over the centuries. And to me, that is priceless.
I love that you're bringing out that point, the artistry. Like, there is, I was going to say an overabundance, but that would denote it as a negative thing. It's not a negative thing. There's an unusually high percentage of artists that are among Armenians, right? Like, it's crazy. And I'm like, at first I thought it was just the circles that I run in, right? I know musicians and stuff, and I keep getting invited to art galleries and exhibits, and people mentioning, oh, I need to introduce you to this artist. And I look them up. I'm like, there's so many, and their art is amazing, incredible. And so, backing up a little bit, as I was researching this, for this early on in my 7-year journey, discovering obviously that Armenia, the first Christian nation, that milestone in history. But then, as you were saying, they didn't have a written alphabet. They didn't have, like, having existed already for thousands of years prior to becoming a Christian nation, they didn't have a written alphabet. They had their own language, a very distinct ancient language. They didn't have a written alphabet until converting to Christianity and then wanting to be able to have the word of God in their hands for the average person, for anybody to read. They created an alphabet. As Christians, like, we want people to read the Bible, so let's write it down. And those things become Armenian identity, even though they didn't exist. The alphabet didn't exist before it. Because of Christianity, the Armenian identity has become even more rich. And I guess I'm repeating myself in that regard. But it also follows that as Christians, meaning you know reality, right? You understand reality better than when you're not a Christian, and you appreciate reality. And God is an artist. He's a creator and an artist. So when you get closer to God, that artistic nature thrives, right? And so Armenian art is incredible. Armenian music, the instrumentation. And here's another thing that I realized after, here I am in my 50s, and these instruments that I learn are Armenian instruments that are authentic Armenian instruments. And I hear them and they're beautiful. And I'm like, wait, that's familiar. I've heard that before, right? This instrumentation has been known and is used in Hollywood scores and in other music. And it's like, oh, that's Armenian. Now it's something that I'm familiar with, that I've been familiar with, that I'm like, oh, I've always had that piece of Armenia in my understanding. I just didn't know it was Armenian. So Armenia itself as a culture has had that impact. And the more you learn about Armenia, you realize, oh, they're a foundational culture to modern human progress and civilization.
Absolutely.
Well, Daniel, we got 3 minutes left. How has your live stream experience, your first live stream experience gone?
Well, I'm still going. I guess that's a positive, a net positive. So, I'm the kind of person who likes things planned out well ahead of time and know what I'm going to say. And to put it on live, it's just, whatever comes out, and it's out there. You put it out there into the world. So,
trust in the Lord.
Yeah. One thing that I'd like to say in the time that we have left is, with all this discussion about Armenian identity, there is a tendency sometimes as people, even whether it's Americans or Armenians, is that it's very easy for us to break ourselves down into those groups. Or he's one of them. He's a Western Armenian. He's an Eastern Armenian. He belongs to the Western Church. He belongs to the Eastern Church. He's a French Armenian or a Lebanese Armenian versus a Hayastansi Armenian, one born in Armenia. And it's very easy for us to create these divisions within the Armenian culture. To my mind, Armenians are Armenians, and the more that we can stick together and support one another and stand united in defense of the nation of Armenia, of Artsakh, of recognition of the genocide, and other very important Armenian issues, our voice becomes stronger as we stand as one nation of people. And I think that's really an incredible thought for this day that we need to focus on. The other thing that I would leave you with this thought. In my very early experience with Armenia, I wrote a song with Artsakh originally called Mush. I wrote a set of English lyrics and turned it into what you call Noah's Prayer. In there, I say a lyric that Armenia is the place where God gave man a second chance. It's really a very important thought. And think about it this way. The earth was virtually destroyed except for the very few people that were on the ark. And when they stepped off the ark, they stepped off of Ararat into Armenia. And so I leave you with this. If that's where humanity started again, and we're all descended from those people, we are all Armenian, just not everybody knows it yet.
Amen. And I'm with you 100%. And also on that note, go there. right?
Yeah.
That's like, go there. If you have never been to Armenia, you're like, what are you guys talking about Armenia? We've showed videos on this show of Armenia. Go there, go there, go there. Fall in love with this place, fall in love with these people, and you'll get it. You'll understand even more. All right. We are out of time. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, everyone. Remember to share, subscribe, and share. And we'll see you all next week. God is in control.